Welcome to another episode of the SimTech podcast, where we explore the tools, techniques and innovations shaping the world of clinical simulation. I'm your host, Craig, and today we're diving into a game changer in the field, SimEPR. Joining me are two special guests, Arron and Paul, who have been instrumental in integrating this technology into simulation training. We'll discuss what SimEPR is, how it works, and the impact it is having on preparing healthcare professionals for the real-world challenges. Whether you're a seasoned SimTech or just starting out, you won't want to miss this. Hello and welcome to the SimTech podcast. Today we're going to be talking about SimEPR. Although there's a branding issue, I'm going to be talking about all things SimEPR. And today with me, I've got two guests. Paul is going to be sitting in the co-host chair today. Paul, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Paul Wilder. I'm the interim technology enhanced learning lead at Frimley Health, and I operationally run a simulation suite at the Frimley Park Hospital site.
Welcome, Paul. And the next man needs no introduction when SimEPR is involved. Arron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Arron. So in terms of my background, I'm a GP based in London, and I'm also a software developer. I'm the founder and developer of SimEPR.
Interesting that you introduce yourself as a doctor first rather than a SimEPR enthusiast. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as we'll probably talk about later on in this podcast, the kind of triad that have basically helped SimEPR become what it is. And I think one of those things is me being, clinical by background. The other is a software developer. And I think the last thing that you absolutely cannot forget is the importance of the simulation community and the feedback they provided to create SimEPR. So that's why I like to introduce myself as those two things first, because actually I think they're prerequisites to, as well as the simulation community, to bring SimEPR into what it is now.
Do you think that's ever going to change? Are you ever just going to hang up the stethoscope to be like, you know what? I'm in a place where I don't need to do this anymore. Or would you see it go the other way? Would you be like, actually, that's SimEPR can run itself. I think I'll just be a doctor now.
It's definitely a thought I've had. I think that essentially, in a crude way of putting it, having your finger on the pulse and having those clinical skills is really important to making sure that SimEPR is up to date. And I think, like I said, in order for SimEPR to have been able to be built in the way that it is now, those clinical skills that I have and the training experience I've had has also been really important to it. So I'd be reluctant to ever fully hang up the stethoscope, and I'd always try and keep my clinical skills up to date so that SimEPR can be up to date.
Well, you must be so busy, but not too busy enough to go on holiday. Where did you go? Was it Thailand?
Yeah, I was in Thailand recently, so it's good to get a break and just relax. And I think you come back with more motivation to carry on building, carry on innovating. So I think taking holidays and leave is really important for that.
Were you true to yourself and completely stepped away from your emails, or did you have a little sneaky look?
No, it's impossible to completely get away from it, and there's always a little bit of coding that needs to be done. So yeah.
Okay, for those that have maybe been living under a rock, can you give us a little bit of a brief overview of what SimEPR is and maybe its mission?
Absolutely. So SimEPR is essentially the UK's most advanced electronic patient record system that's specifically designed for simulation training. And it's a web-based app, so it doesn't need to be physically installed and can be used in a sim environment or with or without a mannequin or even in a classroom setting. And essentially, the mission behind SimEPR has a three-step approach. So firstly, it's to eliminate paper in simulation. As many of the audience will know, electronic patient record systems are becoming increasingly prevalent in healthcare settings and papers becoming outdated. So actually what SimEPR offers is the ability to equip current and future healthcare staff with the digital skills needed for the frontline. As well as that, SimEPR offers a higher fidelity training experience. And then last of all, one of the aims behind SimEPR is to save staff time and costs associated with delivering simulation training.
So why don't we just use regular EPR in simulation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think one of the problems with using a regular EPR system is that it doesn't have those educational features that a bespoke system would provide. For example, and I think Paul probably have a lot of opinions on this as a user of SimEPR as well, but let's say you delivered your simulation and you then needed to wipe the scenario. How do you do that on a clinical EPR? How do you build your own custom scenarios with their own radiology results and blood results on a real clinical EPR system? How do you monitor what the trainee is doing on their computer using the EPR system? Whereas on SimEPR, for example, you have a whole interface that allows you to monitor their activity. And there's a whole host of other things, which is why, in reality, clinical EPR systems aren't used for simulation training.
Yeah, do you agree there, Paul?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in fact, I can't say that I miss the after every simulation scenario having to grab all of the paperwork, the drug chart, the CAS card, the new sheet, and all the other sheets back out the simulation suite, and then frantically rub them all out before I can use them again for the next one. So yes, I think Arron, he spotted that sort of kind of missing bit in the market, and I remember from my perspective, I was supporting a simulation scenario, and the medical student was asked to make sure that they wrote on the drug chart, and they just looked up in the middle of the scenario and went, "I've not come across one of these before. I don't use paper. I don't know how to do this." And that was the epiphany I had that said, we've got to go to something else, and and in terms of what Arron was just saying there. If we tried using our real EPR system. One of my colleagues spent 6 months doing all of their training so that we were allowed to use what was called a playground on their system. But one of the issues we had with that was we weren't allowed to create our own patients on it, and they only changed every night. So basically, we could only run it once in the day. So it was absolutely hopeless. It was absolutely hopeless.
Yeah, I mean, I've also gone through this. So before I knew about SimEPR, we tried to use real EPR, and we got hold of like the training domain. And one of the problems is that we never really owned it. And, it was always somebody else who had control over it. So if someone, for instance, wanted to wipe it or do a reset, they wouldn't even consider people using it as a training tool. So, we always felt that was a bit of a threat. Isn't it a problem as well that real EPR is too in-depth?
Yeah, I think that was again one of the things I think, and speaking for Arron there, I think he even uses the words which I really like, which is cognitive overload, and I think that's unless your scenario's educational objective is teaching the real EPR system, which it is for one day of the year in our trust, but unless that's your educational objective, then you don't want to use a horrifically overcomplicated £100 million EPR system, when you just have got a deteriorating patient and they just need to check the clinical history or something.
Yeah, because we're becoming danger in it, turning it into an EPR lesson, don't we? Mm-hmm. How did you decide what made the cut, Arron? What went into SimEPR and what didn't?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the first step was looking at a variety of different EPR providers and looking at the common themes in terms of their design. So the idea is to create something that's as generic as possible in the way that it looks. Then the next step was to think about core EPR features that tend to be used in a acute or a training session. So, for example, notes for the documentation and observations, investigation results, and all these key things that you will need to use as part of the simulation and teaching. And then using the design features that I pulled across from the different EPR providers, putting that into an easy to understand and logical way that shares all the design features. And that essentially was the approach I used to decide, what essentially made the cut in terms of features and the way that it looked.
Are you still listening to users' feedback and developing SimEPR compared to what they feel is added or needed or what they don't need?
Absolutely, yeah. So always open to feedback from faculty in terms of improvements, fixing bugs and so on. So it's a constant iterative process. And I mean, Paul is an exemplar faculty member who's been giving us some great feedback in terms of updates and things. And I think one of the most recent updates based on Paul's feedback was actually the anesthetics chart for the simulation in the OR setting, operating room setting, which was really great. And yeah, so it's if you look at SimEPR, 2 or 3 years ago and the way that it looked and its functionality compared to now, you'll see there's been a huge difference, and that's all been driven by feedback from the simulation faculty using SimEPR.
I think what he's saying that I talk a lot and I send him lots of emails. But that was an interesting one when you're talking about theatre paperwork, because I was just thinking, so the reason that we asked for theatre paperwork and things like the WHO surgical checklist was because we do a lot of ODP sim and anaesthetic sim. How difficult do you find that, Arron, as someone who is a GP who probably hasn't done a rotation in theatres?
Yeah, it was a tough challenge, I'll admit. It did take a bit of time to get my head around, do some research, get my head around the whole process. I think the documents you sent over were really great because it in some ways, you're digitizing already a paper document, which is definitely a lot easier than doing something from scratch. So that's always really, really helpful. But yeah, it did take quite a lot of research to get my head around the whole process and how the theatre simulation would work.
Yeah, it's something that we might take for granted, that, you think, oh, it's just simulation, but it's not. It's simulation for every single speciality, because we use it all the time. Is there any departments or specialities that don't use EPR and they still just use paper?
That's an interesting question, that, actually. So the only way I know that is I think when we have scenarios where they say they don't want to use the SimEPR system. And the only ones I can think of, everybody that has seen it loves it. The only ones that tend to not use it, I think, that much are where we're doing very fast ED scenarios, especially in situ sim, where the focus isn't on actually recording the patient's details. They just want to get to the nub of the clinical issue that's the simulation objective. I'm interested now, actually, because we just started using it with physios as well. So even so we're using it with the allied health professionals now as well, which is an interesting offshoot. But they don't need anything extra, I don't think, over what's already on the system.
Okay, it sounds all great. And I love the whole SimEPR and how easy it is to use. What kind of challenges is it facing, Arron? Are you getting any feedback saying, look, this doesn't work, or this isn't quite sitting right with us?
So it's a really good question. And I think that as SimEPR becomes increasingly widespread and used more and more, the type of use cases that it starts getting used in begins to expand. So we started off initially with simulation in NHS hospitals, which would typically have a single mannequin. So there would be one simulation running at a particular point in time. And then as soon as SimEPR started to get more interest, universities became interested, and actually they needed something a little bit bigger because they would often run simulation with multiple mannequins, multiple patients. So they would effectively have a simulated ward. And some of the feedback I had was actually they need something a bit bigger scale compared to what SimEPR was at the time. And that's essentially how SimWard was built. So what you can do is you can build a simulated ward of up to 15 patients, and you can monitor the activity that's happening on those 15 patients at the same time. So multiple trainees interacting with multiple patients. And now from there, SimEPR has gone from being used in a simulated ward, so simulated sim room setting with a mannequin, and then simulated ward. And now we actually have faculty using SimEPR in a classroom setting. So that's really interesting because it's without a mannequin. And even a step further, which is even more recently, is SimEPR is being used with the student actually at home. So that's an interesting approach, which I'd never even really thought about before. So that's something that's very, very early days at the moment. I'm really interested to hearing feedback from, I think it's University of West London that have started doing that. Really interested in hearing feedback from them in terms of how that will work and whether there needs to be any fine-tune adjustments for the way SimEPR or SimWard, or even a slightly different offshoot of SimWard needs to be created to accommodate learning at home. So I think that's an interesting direction that SimEPR is going, and it will probably need some fine-tuning and updates in order to further facilitate that type of teaching.
So one of the issues that I have, not just with SimEPR, is implementing something into simulation that can be distracting, can take a little bit longer. There's a little bit of a learning curve because, the participants might not have seen SimEPR before. So it's not a critique of SimEPR per se, it's implementing SimEPR into simulation. What kind of workarounds can we get to fix those kind of problems where actually we're finding everything's just maybe detracting from simulation?
So I think the first point I would say, and this is touching on what Paul was saying earlier, was we're getting to a stage where people are so used to digital things, and if you bring a paper drug chart in front of a medical student, for example, it's something that they might not have ever even seen before. And you could make a good argument to say, actually, they would be more comfortable using a digital system because it's something they've seen more of and more familiar with on a day-to-day basis than actually a paper system, because those things are becoming increasingly erased. And, I did my F1 at Croydon, which was completely paperless, and then went on to work at another site, which at the time was in the process of transitioning to electronic systems. There was still some paper. And for the first week, I was so confused about how to use this drug chart because I'd never used one on paper before. So I think that's the first thing to say. And I think you do make a good point, though, about getting around, you want the focus of the simulation to be about the clinical training, ultimately. They're not there to necessarily learn how to use the EPR system. They're there to understand the clinical skills. So that's why we have videos which trainees can watch ahead of their simulation. And usually there's some form of orientation in terms of explaining what SimEPR is before their simulation starts. And like I said, it's been designed to be as generic as possible with only the key functionalities, which has the benefit of over using a full-blown clinical EPR system.
Yeah, I think it's because we had one scenario where the participant came in the room and it's almost like we're giving them a little bit of a barrier, a little bit of a shield, something to hide behind. So they stood behind the laptop for 10 minutes looking at the notes. And although we sometimes forget that actually we're providing a live streaming TV program here, we've got people in the other room watching. And actually now they're just watching this participant on the laptop trying to figure things out. So sometimes, but a skilled debriefer will be, they'd use this to their advantage and say, you know what, he might have done that in real life because these systems are still there in real life. So actually we've got a good learning point here, or actually don't just go into a room and give yourself this barrier where you hide behind and read notes. There's a person there waiting to be talked to, so there is a real learning key there as well in there.
I find that an interesting point, actually. I've got a couple of issues. I've got a couple of interesting observations on that. The first one we've started experimenting with is that the candidates can quite rightly say, well, in reality, I wouldn't be going to see this patient without having seen their notes beforehand anyway. So we've started experimenting in the briefing stage before they go in the scenario room with actually being able to look at SimEPR on the big screen and actually brief themselves of what's going on before they go in. And so we haven't done that for many sims yet, but we're experimenting with that to see if that can get around that issue of them having to then spend 10 minutes going through everything inside the room. I think you do raise a good point, Craig, though, about sometimes about it being a barrier. We've certainly seen occasionally. So our touchscreen computer that has SimEPR on is facing away from the patient. And we've definitely seen cases where the candidates kind of get focused on what's on the computer screen while behind them the patient is slowly deteriorating. and they're not kind of noticing that. But I think those are really good points that can be picked up in the debrief, because that's why we do simulation, because a lot of simulation for us is actually about those soft skills. It's about leadership, teamwork, situational awareness. So if they're focused on that computer the whole time and they didn't notice the patient's deteriorating, then actually discussing that in the debrief is actually really valuable learning for that candidate that they can take off into their real practice.
Yeah, Paul, when you were doing your simulation, did you? So you said you had it up in the debrief room on the large screen on their initial pre-brief section.
We've tried that.
Yeah. Did you ever give up a camera feed for the SimEPR screen so they could watch the participant go through it in real time in the debrief room?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. So when we first introduced SimEPR, we realised that actually just focusing one of our cameras on the computer screen wasn't going to work, because you just get the back of the candidate the whole time. So what we actually do is on that computer we run a Teams session, and then we feed it straight through to a large screen monitor that is in the corner of the room that everyone's watching in. So now they've got four camera streams looking at the scenario room, one patient monitor stream, and now off to one side on a big TV screen, they've got exactly what the candidates are doing on SimEPR. And occasionally myself or facilitator has kind of popped out the control room and just looked around into there to see what actually is it they're doing on that screen at the moment. And back again.
Yeah, because it kind of generated a conversation around in our sim room, is like, because we use SMOTs, so we generally have a four camera layout, 3 cameras for the room, and then we have 1 camera feed given up for the observations. Now the conversation was around, do we then want to give another camera feed for SimEPR for maybe the 20-30 seconds that they're on it? People can see what they're clicking through, what they're reading. Or do we, like you've done, maybe give up I think we settled on maybe like a projector and projecting it onto a separate side wall just for that very brief time, hopefully very brief time, for them to look at, because we didn't know if it was worth giving up a camera feed for just SimEPR.
Yeah, we looked at it, and it just, because SimEPR is so detailed on the screen, you need a big screen for it. So giving up one of your camera streams isn't going to work, in my opinion. You need to devote a separate thing to it. But I quite like the fact that even when they're not on it, that screen is still up for all of the other candidates that are watching their colleagues in the scenario room. The fact that they can see what screen it's been left on and what's currently, and they can look at that screen. It gives them a little bit more data about what's going on.
Yeah, I think we also maybe discussed maybe printing out SimEPR and putting like the just paper copies in the room that they can maybe browse through. Although I think someone said that it might detract attention from actual the scenario again.
I would be interested if someone does that, because I've not thought of doing that.
Yeah, there was also options like maybe having iPads and stuff scattered around where they can peruse at their leisure, those kind of things. It's interesting, isn't it, when you talk to other people and you see what ideas other people are coming up with.
That's an interesting concept to basically have other iPads in the streaming room, effectively on the facilitator side, I guess, looking at exactly what they're doing that way. So they can just, I think you could do that if you've got like 20 people watching it. Maybe if you've just got a couple of people watching it, you could get away with that.
Yeah. Like you say, these are all IT issues. I mean, that kind of brings us on to the next point, Arron, is have you been liaising with Trust IT department, or is that exactly why you've decided to go browser version?
So, yeah, the browser version was definitely, so initially SimEPR was a desktop app. That was the very first version that was created. And it needs to be physically installed on computers, which, as you can imagine, does raise potential issues with having to liaise with IT. And I think as there was more interest in SimEPR, the decision was made to make it web-based, because it's much easier to cover a greater geographical area with a web-based app. And also it means updates are instant. So, for example, if someone gave me some feedback and I needed to build something new, I can then build that and then push an update out, and instantly, the next time the users open the SimEPR app, they've got their new updated version of the app.
Does it work offline, or does it always have to be online?
It has to be online. It has to be connected to the internet, because there's a connection between the simulator, the person who's using the simulation mode to the trainee, and then the facilitator using the controller mode, and that's connected via the internet. And all the scenarios are hosted on the internet as well. And because nothing needs to be installed, it gets around a lot of IT issues. Now, IT issues do happen, so there was a bit of an issue at Frimley with, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was something to do with, it wasn't connecting to the server properly, but fortunately we were able to get around that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, does it work with like free NHS Wi-Fi and those kind of things, or even corporate Wi-Fi? It's not blocked in any way?
So typically, yes. Sometimes there can be specific NHS trusts that have some security protocols in place that need to be slightly amended. So that does require some liaising with IT, but it's fairly straightforward to resolve. But overall, generally speaking, it works with any sort of Wi-Fi or internet connection.
Cool. Let's talk about your competition, Arron. What's out there that you're competing against? Is there anything else that's like SimEPR?
Fortunately, at the moment, I'm not aware of any software that offers anything similar to what SimEPR does. And we've also more recently expanded into Australia. So we have University of Adelaide using SimEPR. And I think from their perspective as well, they haven't seen anything quite as extensive as what SimEPR offers.
Yeah, Paul, what kind of experimental SimEPRs are out there? I know you've seen a few. I mean, I think I've created one myself.
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote a 3-part article for the London Simulation Network that anyone can look up online, where I kind of discussed what your options were when it came to introducing an EPR system into your simulation sessions. And I kind of went through all the different options. And basically, Arron's right. When it comes to a commercial system, his is the only commercial system, and he is way, way far and above anything else that is out there. But because we are simulation technicians and because we are, IT tinkerers, there has been over a handful, I would say, of different organisations who have effectively homegrown their own solutions. To nearly all of them, I would say, are based on a Microsoft Excel base, but some of them are very impressive in terms of how they look that you wouldn't even know it was Microsoft Excel. There's certainly one that a London trust has produced where they are effectively allowing anybody to use their system and basically build on it in their own way, which is great. But I think basically, as my articles kind of allude to, if you've got the money, then SimEPR is without doubt at the moment the only way to go, and it is worth going down. It is worth the money. From our trust perspective, ignoring the mannequins themselves, this is the most expensive thing we buy every year. But we think it's worth it. But I am aware, because I've been in that situation myself, that sometimes, there are trusts or organisations out there that just don't have the money. They just don't have the budget. And if you don't have the budget, there's no point saying how great SimEPR is because they don't have the budget to pay for it. At which point, I kind of feel it's my job when I'm pointing this out to say, okay, well, let's have a look what can be done then. What else is there on the market? But yeah, the functionality that Arron has put into his product is truly amazing.
What do you think the main differences are there, Paul, between maybe a homegrown to SimEPR?
Well, I think kind of Arron kind of mentioned some of those earlier on. I think. Bear in mind, of course, I'm not a user of a homegrown system, but I have kind of seen a few of them. I think, firstly, Arron's system looks a lot more like a real EPR system without being too overly complicated. Although some of the systems out there do look pretty good. I think a lot of the systems out there that were homegrown have issues in terms of reacting to the data that's input. So, for example, the prescribing side of some of the homegrown systems isn't very good. Or
yeah, for me, it was the push and the pull aspect of it, being able to push information into the sim room and obviously receive information back. I think that is, it was too hard to replicate on maybe a spreadsheet.
You know, I know one trust that literally effectively they had a fellow who's a bit of a tinkerer, a bit of a programmer himself, and he just spent 6 months doing nothing other than creating their system, which was great. But that was 2 years ago, and he's now left their trust, and no one knows how to update their system. Which, of course, is another advantage you have with SimEPR, is that, of course, you know, not only will he do updates, but if there's bug fixes or changes that need to be made, then he'll do it because it's a commercial system.
How long did it take you to create it, Arron?
Well, it's been a long time. I mean, it's
Still
probably
been
around 4 years, and it's been a constant process. So it's always about creating new things, building on add-on features. So I think one of the things to consider is, I think when people talk about homegrown innovations, which is great to see, I think one of the factors that can't be underestimated is time, and the time that people have to put into this product or innovation. Whereas I think with something like SimEPR, essentially, you know, apart from building the scenarios and delivering the simulation, all the technical aspects are kind of, in a sense, outsourced. When it comes to improvements, bug fixes, you know, that's left for us to do, essentially, rather than, and allows basically simulation faculty to do what they do best and do what they want to do, which is deliver the teaching, essentially.
I think
so,
you've missed. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, Paul. You go.
I was going to say, I think you've also missed a really big point there, Arron, which is that from my side, I'm very proud of the fact that you've built a collaborative system, and that anybody, as soon as they're on SimEPR, can just see the scenarios that we use in our trust that are very exceptionally detailed, that are like 12 pages detailed, and they can pull down, say, our anaphylaxis scenario, and they could just use that straight away. They don't need, because we built into our library and our documents a SharePoint link straight through to our documents of the scenario, so people can pull our documents down and then pull the SimEPR scenario down and just use them immediately. They wouldn't even need to change anything, I don't think. And I think that's really powerful for new users because the amount of time it would otherwise take to build their own scenario library.
Yeah, I mean, everybody that I've spoke to, Arron, loves SimEPR, but not everybody has it, mainly because it's around costing. How much does SimEPR cost?
So we have a three-tiered pricing plan depending on the packages that with the individual features that people want. So that for the full pricing, people can get in touch with me or the Sim and Skills team. But essentially, it's a three-tiered pricing plan. The very first plan has just SimEPR, so it doesn't have the SimWard feature. It's more geared toward the NHS trusts, and it's a build your own package. So you can essentially add in the features that you want. And then the second package and the third package both have SimEPR and SimWard and have varying levels of logins and scenario storage capacity. So essentially we have a package plan that's available for hospitals and universities.
And it's a licensing plan, is that right, Arron?
Yep, so there's a yearly licensing plan that allows you to use the platform, create scenarios and deliver simulation, but it also gives you access to the updates and the servicing that comes with it.
Cool. And so you've talked about updates, Arron. Is there anything on the horizon? What's next for SimEPR? Any major projects or goals coming up?
So we actually just released an update about 2 weeks ago, which was SimEPR's mobile app, which was quite an interesting feature that was developed in collaboration with Bucks NHS Trust. And what we found was that, well, electronic patient record systems on computers are obviously becoming increasingly widespread, but also what's coming along with that are mobile apps that accompany the EPR systems. So we built this mobile version that allows trainees to upload observations, view observations, view trigger and escalation information, complete assessments like MUS scoring, GCS, and so on. And what was really great to see about this was that now what SimEPR offers is the ability to train your students and train healthcare staff to use not just computers and tablets, but also mobile phones, the whole range of devices in simulation.
Cool. All right, Paul, any final questions before we sign off?
I actually want to go back a bit, actually, because, you know, I did a computer science degree last century because I'm quite old now. And but it was really interesting recently at a conference hearing Arron's background to learning about programming. And I think it's worth just Arron, just tell everyone, like how did you, because I learned programming through doing a degree. How did you learn programming?
There's an interesting story, actually. So I was an F1 doctor, and one of the things I found was that it was based on a quality improvement project. So we found that people were quite frequently badly prescribing a medication called gentamicin. And as some of the audience might know, gentamicin requires a calculation based on the patient's body weight and renal function. So we found from an audit quite a huge number of prescriptions were poorly prescribed. And me and a couple of colleagues learned how to code. There was actually a consultant microbiologist at Croydon University Hospital who did a computer science degree before he did medicine. And he essentially helped us learn how to code. And we built this app that essentially allowed clinicians to calculate the dose of these prescriptions for gentamicin. And we were able to eliminate these prescribing errors. And so then at that point, I realized actually you can build some really incredible innovations in healthcare, that even some of the most simple things like drug dose calculators, and make a real change. So that's essentially what spurred my journey into learning how to code.
I've heard that you've actually been trying to teach techs to do some of this. Is that right?
Yeah. So at SimSkills, a recent conference that SimSkills did, and we had all the technicians and faculty, and I delivered a coding workshop for them so they could, I guess you can't really learn how to code in just a few hours, but I guess it was more just to inspire them and show them actually these are skills that are quite easy to learn with a bit of time. And hopefully some of them will go on to kind of practice coding and take those skills further.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, techs think of all these ideas all the time, but being able to actually put it into practice is probably a step too far for most people. Although, AI is coming in, maybe AI can do it for us one day. All right, finally. Okay, I think we've hit our time quota. I think, what's the best way to get hold of you then, Arron, if someone wants to contact you?
So you can contact me at arron@simepr.com, or you can look at our website, www.simepr.com.
And I'll put all that information in the description of the podcast as well. Brill. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Arron, for coming. That's all we've got time for today. But hopefully, I'm definitely going to have you on again, Paul, at some point. But maybe in the near future, Arron, we'll have a bit of an update for you, and we'll invite you back on to see what's next in SimEPR. Brill. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the SimTech podcast. A huge thank you to Arron and Paul for sharing their insights on SimEPR and its transformative role in simulation. I hope you found today's discussion as informative and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow SimTechs and healthcare professionals. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a message or connect to me on social media. Until next time, keep innovating, keep learning, and keep making a difference in simulation.